Vikings have landed. Where are you all from? Are you all from Oslo or someplace else? Someplace? Norway. Bergen. My name is Seth Shostak. Very difficult name, Seth. Sugar Echo Tango Hawaii. And it's almost SETI, but that's an accident. My title here is Senior Astronomer, which I think is a reference to my age. I'll tell you a little bit, because very few of you have been here before. The SETI Institute is a non-profit organization. It's not obviously a corporation. We don't make any money. We do lose money, however. And it's, it's designed for research that addresses the question of life in space. Now, my particular group, the group that I work for most of the time, is the SETI group. So we're looking not just for life in space, but intelligent life in space. Okay, so you know how that works. Any of you see the movie Contact? Yes. Okay, so that's based on this institute. In fact, I was an advisor for the film, as many of the rest of us were here as well. We try and eavesdrop on signals that they might be sending. The antennas we use for that are not here, right? It would be very convenient if the antennas were here, but this is the Bay Area. There are like 7 million people here in the Bay Area, okay? And so that means there's a lot of interference, radio interference. So if you had the antennas sitting out in the backyard, it'd be great, but you would be swamped with all the, the electrical noise around here, the radio noise, everything else. So the antennas are located up in the Cascade Mountains of Northern California, about 550 kilometers from where you're sitting. We could go up there, but I don't think you have enough time. There's only one way to get there. You have to drive. Basically, you have to drive. So it's a long trip. Okay. But being up there in the mountains, that means that those antennas are shielded against all the interference coming out of the San Francisco Bay Area. That's SETI, and I suspect you have questions about it, so that's okay. But SETI is actually a very tiny bit of what this institute does. The total number of people that do SETI here at this institute is the number of people in the front row here. Okay, that's very small. There's no money. That's the problem. It's all privately funded. There's no government money. This is not like Europe, where they have a more enlightened view of science research, and the government will fund it, and not just for a year at a time. Not here. SETI, when I joined the SETI Institute back in 1990, 1991, SETI was a NASA project. So we were getting money from NASA. But that ended 1,000 days after I got here. Maybe not because I got here, but 1,000 days after we got here, the Congress killed NASA SETI. For political reasons. They really weren't very good reasons, but whatever. So ever since that time, SETI is run on private monies. So to make the observations that we make looking for ET, that's done on the basis of money that people donate, mostly donate. The bulk of the research here is actually what's called astrobiology. And I think most of you know what astrobiology is. So it seems like a Latin and Greek word now that I think about it. But in any case, maybe it's just all Greek. Astrobiology is just the question of life in general. So most of the people up there, most of the scientists who are doing astrobiology, and that number is equal to more or less this room, okay? They're interested in Mars. Could there be life on Mars? Was there life on Mars? What's the hydrological history of Mars? That sort of thing. Or they're interested in moons of the outer solar system, Jupiter, Saturn. I think many of you know these stories. So that's what they're working on. There's another group, Education and Outreach, very tiny, that worries about producing materials for classrooms, either elementary, high school, even college. I've written a college textbook on astrobiology. So that's formal education. And then the last thing we do is informal education. And what that means is giving talks, or like I was doing in Norway, right? Talks for cruise passengers, for very rich cruise passengers. Comes the poorest guy on the ship. Or the media, writing articles, appearing on television, radio shows. And we actually, the Institute does its own radio show every week, 1 hour, Big Picture Science, about science in general. And we can look at the studio. I'm the host of that. Okay, having said all that, that's the organization. So it's in total about 135, 140 people. And most of the science here is actually astrobiology, not SETI. But SETI was our first project. SETI is the sexy topic. SETI, 9 out of 10 calls from the media, maybe 95 out of 100, are about SETI. They'll occasionally call about Mars, but mostly what they want to hear about is, have you found E.T.? And the answer is no, because if the answer were yes, I wouldn't be here. You're nice folks, but I'd be in Stockholm getting a check and a prize. So, that's it. Okay. SETI at home. Yeah, one of you had a SETI. Yes, SETI at home. Great project to take SETI data collected down at the Arecibo telescope in Puerto Rico and have you analyze it at your expense on your home machine. It is not our project.
It's Berkeley?
It's Berkeley. It's the University of California, Berkeley SETI program.
But do you get the data though? Or what's
no, they have their own data. They collect the data. They collect the results. We collect the credit. It's great. I recommend it. Don't have to do any of the work and you get all the benefit, it seems. That project started at least 10 years ago, at least. And in fact, the guys who thought it up were up in the state of Washington, near Seattle. And I have a buddy up there whom I've done SETI projects with, Woody Sullivan. And he called me up one afternoon. He said, Shostak, a buddy of mine has this idea. We can use home computers to produce SETI data. And I tried flying that here at the Institute, but they weren't interested, which may have been a big mistake, but maybe not, because the nature of our experiment is such that we have control of the antenna. We point it. The SETI at home people have to take whatever data is coming in. No matter where the telescope is pointed, they get the data. But that means if we get a signal, we have the opportunity to follow up, to immediately look again. And with SETI at home, you can't do that.
Yeah, I thought that was the whole idea with the wide range of the data collected, that you guys don't have the capacity to analyze it all, so you distribute it throughout the world. And if you find anything, you can go back and say, oh,
yeah,
you've got to point it back up there.
That's the model for SETI at home, that you distribute the data, people find a signal, then you can go back and look later. Mm-hmm. And that's great in terms of data processing, because obviously you have all those millions of computers out there. So you can look for various signal types that we can't look, because we have to look in real time. But the disadvantage is, A, you've got millions of people looking through these data. They're going to find things. Of course they're going to find things. And if you find one spike in a spectrum, you say, well, I don't know, Ralph, that looks pretty interesting. But it could be noise. If you find it again at the same frequency and at the same spot on the sky, you say, well, it looks a little more interesting. But you can do the statistics. It's still not statistically significant. There's so many data. If you see it 3 times, then it's worth looking again. And they have done that. They don't find it. But the real problem is, you know, E.T. doesn't know we're here. Right? Unlike what you see in the movies on TV, the aliens come to Earth because they want the water, right? Or they want the stockfish or something. I don't know what they want. But whatever they want, they come here. But they don't know about you yet. They don't know, right? Because our signals have been going out into space since the Second World War. So that's only 70 light years out. And if they're more than 35 light years out, they haven't had enough time to pick up our television, decide they don't like the jokes, and come here to destroy the Earth, right? So, you know, they may only be sending a signal once just to see. And if they send it once, then when you go back to look with SETI at home, they're not there anymore, and you throw it out. It's like the wow signal. It was only seen once. It wasn't even seen a minute later, because it was looked for 70 seconds later. Yeah, about, well, it's been 15 years ago, there was a big report that was made with the help of people from around the world, actually, on what SETI should be doing by the year 2020. One problem with SETI right from its beginning is that it was always done on borrowed telescopes, always using somebody else's antenna. Now that means you get a big antenna, but you only get it for a small amount of time. When we went down to Puerto Rico to use that antenna, we would get it for essentially 2 weeks a year. And really, since it was only the evenings, it was really 1 week a year. Okay. That's good, it's a good antenna, but 1 week a year, it's like trying to do cancer research, but always having to borrow the microscope. So the recommendation of this working group was build your own antenna. And that's great. That's like saying, let's go to Mars. It's great, but somebody has to pay for it. And we built as much of the Allen Telescope Array as we had money for. There are 42 antennas up there. But the design was for 350 antennas. So if any of you has, done really well in the stock market or something, investments in oil off the shore, off the coast there, whatever. I know that Norway is rich, I was told. But, then we could finish it, but it's only 42 antennas. What are we using it for now? Looking at the center of the galaxy. Center of the galaxy is a special place. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the center of our galaxy, but that's the one place that everybody will know. Everybody in the Milky Way will know about the center. They might not know about anything else, but they always know about the center, right? It's a singular place. So maybe some really advanced society, remember the Milky Way is 3 times as old as the Earth, so there could be very advanced societies out there. They have a big transmitter at the Milky Way center that says, hi, look, we're the Klingons, why don't you join our book club, whatever they want. Okay, so we're looking there. We're also looking at the star systems in the field of the Kepler Space Telescope that are suspected of having planets. So those are at least planets. I'm not sure that's such a valuable thing to do anymore, because now we know that virtually all stars have planets. So you might as well look at stars that are closer. But we are doing that, and we have other projects underway. So it is being used, but on any given day, not all 42 antennas will work, so it's more like 35 or so. So, we need more antennas, and it's a money problem. It's always a money problem with SETI. I don't want to talk to you about money, but it's a money problem. There are lots of other ways to do SETI. They all depend on signals, obviously, unless you're expecting them to land. 1/3 of Americans think they have landed. 1/3. I don't know if you. Well, in Europe it's the same, by the way. I used to live in Europe, and it wasn't that different from the U.S., except the cuisine. That was different. But there are other schemes. For example, there was a guy here last week who was talking about building a very, very large optical telescope, one with mirrors and lenses, trying to find, that works in the infrared, trying to look at planets, individual planets. That's very hard to do, but with a big enough telescope you could, and see if there's any excess heat coming off those planets. Because a society that's 500 or 1,000 years more advanced than we are will use even more energy than we do. And that energy eventually gets turned into heat. That's what you do with it. I mean, you step on the brakes of your car, you turn all that gasoline's energy into heat, right? A lot of heat. And you could see that with a big enough telescope. So that's another way to do it. But, I get emails every day from people who have ideas about other ways to do SETI. And some of them, they suggest things, well, you should use neutrinos or gravity waves. I think a lot of people think that gravity waves travel instantaneously. Apparently they don't. Although nobody really knows for sure yet, because we haven't found any. But or other schemes. Or they'll suggest there's some phenomenon you guys aren't considering, like hyperdimensional physics or telepathy or something like that. But the problem with all that is, it sounds good on radio shows. But if you don't understand the science, in fact, there may not be any science for any of this stuff, then you can't do an experiment. You can only build equipment for the physics you know. It's very hard to build equipment for the physics you don't know. I just actually wrote a short article about this, because it struck me that the Curiosity rover, of course, is on Mars now, but it's not really looking for life. I think you know that. It's looking for chemistry. And you might think, why does NASA do that when they could go for the gold? They could go for the big prize, just look for life. Forget all this geology and hydrology. I mean, that's of interest to a rather small number of people. But everybody's interested in life on Mars. And the answer to that is that, in fact, NASA has, for example, looked for life before. I speak of NASA because I know more about NASA than the European Space Agency's efforts, but I don't mean to be, provincial. But in the 1970s, NASA landed the 2 Viking landers on the surface of Mars, as you know, and their job was to look for life directly. And the results were ambiguous. Most of the Viking crew said, well, no life. One guy said, yes, life. So it's not even clear amongst those who did the experiment. It was very expensive. It could easily have missed life that was under the surface, right? And it was still ambiguous. So NASA decided, I'm not going to do it that way anymore. We're going to look around till we understand the best places to look for life, and then try and design experiments that could find it, even if it's life not as we know it. See, so their plan seems a little too conservative. Even to me, it seems very conservative. But on the other hand, it's the taxpayers' money, and there isn't much of it. And so they're trying to do this in a step-by-step way, to find places on Mars where you can say, there was water here for a long period of time. And now let's go look there. And these are the kind of experiments we'll do. And as I say, that's, that may be slow, but it may be the smart thing to do. So I think that what NASA is doing is actually not so crazy. I wouldn't say that about everything NASA does, but I think that that's not crazy. I think that's a very reasonable approach. The Europeans have done other things. They've been looking for the methane, right? Some of the European satellites have found methane around Mars, and they think that's due to life. Curiosity rover hasn't found any methane. So again, it's ambiguous. It's ambiguous. Anybody still awake? Nobody awake. As I say, I lived in Europe for 13 years. I gave in Holland, and I gave a talk there, not 15 years ago, I don't remember what it was, at the astronomy department at one of the universities on SETI. And the first thing I did was I asked everybody in the room, how many of you think there's intelligent life elsewhere in the galaxy? And all these Dutch guys, they all raised their hand, right? They all said yes. I said, how many of you are willing to spend 1 guilder a year, right, that's half a euro, 1 guilder a year to look for it? All the hands went down. Now, it's known that the Dutch are a little cheap, right? Nonetheless, I was struck by this. And I asked one of the professors at some point after the presentation, I said, why weren't they even willing to spend the cost of a cup of coffee every year to at least look? And what he said to me was, daar zijn we te nuchter voor, which means we're too sober for that, right? Okay. There is a difference in attitudes between Europe and the US on this, because all the SETI experiments, there aren't many, there are only 4. All of them but one are here in the United States. I guess there are 5. They're all in the United States, except for one. There's one in Bologna, Italy. The Italians are the only other country that's doing it. The Japanese are interested, they do something. The Koreans are interested, they do a little bit. The Chinese are interested, they haven't done anything, but they may. But it's basically a US experiment. And why is that? Is it because the US has more money? No. Is it because the US has better antennas? No. Is it because the US has, more scientists? No. Better scientists? No. None of these things. It's philosophy. It's philosophy. And there's a difference. Maybe because the U.S. is basically it's a frontier country. The mentality is still the Wild West, because that wasn't so long ago, right? That was 130 years ago. The West was still wild. So that's still part of the national consciousness. And so America, I think, is more willing to take a gamble on risky adventures. The answer to your question, why do it, is not because you might learn the cure for death or something. I mean, you might, but that isn't why it's being done. There are some people who think that you might learn something very interesting. You might, but I don't even think much about that. What I do think is it's really interesting to know if you're a miracle or if you're not. And I think that's it. It's curiosity. I think it's curiosity. And curiosity is not a luxury. In my opinion, curiosity is a very important thing. Yeah, I think that's what we want to know. I mean, I think that if you ask scientists, I'm pretty sure if you'd ask scientists in the 1970s after the Viking landers, do you think there's life in space? A lot of them would have said, I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe it's the only place where biology exists. Today, you would get a different answer. I bet 90% of them would say, yes, there's biology out there. But now the question is there any intelligent life?
That's amazing.
And that's a very much more difficult question, because that presumes that if I have life on a planet and I let it sit there for a few thousand million years, what fraction of those planets will ever produce something as clever as you are? And you can talk to evolutionary biologists, and some say, yes, it'll happen, and others say, no, it won't happen. It's a big question. And this is the only way to answer that question. It's the only way to know whether intelligence is just an accident or whether it's almost inevitable. And how did our ancestors become intelligent? What evolutionary pressure pushed us toward intelligence? It obviously has survival value. If you doubt that, look out the windows. There's a lot of survival value to be intelligent. But what was it that did it? You know, what were the pressures in the beginning? And there are a lot of interesting ideas about that, but we don't really know the answer. And what we also don't know is, I mean, consider this. 65 million years ago, big rock slams into the Yucatan in Mexico. Wipes out the dinosaurs, but 2/3 of everything else on land. Right? If that hadn't happened, if that rock had arrived, you know, 5 hours earlier, it would have missed the Earth, and you wouldn't be sitting here. There would be dinosaurs in Mountain View. Maybe, or maybe you think, no, but the dinosaurs would have evolved into something smart. Right? Well, that's very unclear. I mean, if you ask an evolutionary biologist this, and I have, they'll say, well, look, the dinosaurs had 150 million years to get smart, and they didn't. So another 65 million years probably wouldn't have mattered. So it's a rather interesting question from the standpoint of evolutionary biology.
Then the question, what's intelligent?
Intelligence for us is very simple. I mean, you can decide for yourself whether you're, you know, walk around your neighborhood and decide, are these intelligent or not? But for us, it means, can you build a radio transmitter?
Communication.
If you can build a radio transmitter, you're intelligent. So ask the person sitting next to you, hey, can you build a radio transmitter? And you'll know how to treat them the rest of this trip. But that's it. That's a very operational definition. Officially, I mean, there's no real official. There's no law. There's no international body that does this. But there is a protocol that we put together, and it's about 3 pages long. And what it says is, if you find a signal, I mean, nobody's ratified this. Even the United Nations, they have no interest. But if you find a signal, the first thing you do is you check it to make sure it's for real. Of course, that's just good science. The second thing is you tell everybody. Okay? And the third thing is you shouldn't reply without international consultation. Now, nobody specifies what international consultation is. Maybe that's just talking to the Swedish chess team. I mean, I don't know. It's never specified, but, you know, it's just, the real reason for that was back in the days when the Soviet Union was also doing SETI, and they were very worried that the Americans might, you know, set up an exclusive conversation with the aliens and vice versa. So you put that in. That's all the official stuff. That's on paper. You can find it on the web. There's nothing secret about it. I can tell you what really happens, though, because that's more interesting. And we know what really happens because we've had false alarms. In 1997, there was a false alarm that for a day we thought was the real deal. And we were all up, nobody went to sleep. You know, I was worried that I had all these lunches and dinners scheduled that week, and I thought, if we found ET, I'm going to have to blow all that off. That was what was going through my mind. But I kept waiting for the government to show any interest. The men in black to show up, whatever. Right? Even the mayor of Mountain View to show up. Nothing. Nothing, 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 nothing. Nobody cared.
Really?
Until the morning at about 9:30, I was half asleep at my desk, and the New York Times called. The media are interested. The government seems to not be the least bit interested. Remember, there's no danger here, right? I mean, you tune in your favorite, you know, radio show host there in Oslo, and you know, you're driving along your car, you tune in that station. You don't have to worry that that guy's going to jump into your car and start giving you a hard time. He doesn't know that you've tuned him in. So there's no danger there. Consider this. One of the big things that's going to happen in this century, most likely, is the development of artificial intelligence. It's really artificially intelligent. You may doubt that we'll build a machine that can actually think as well as you can. Many people don't like that idea, but I was up at Stanford, I don't know, a year or two ago, and some TV show, but I was there in the artificial intelligence lab, and the director of the lab came in, and I just asked him, point blank, are we going to make a thinking machine, one that can teach a course at Stanford and write the great American novel? Are we going to build that machine before 2050? And he just looked at me and said, yes. That was his answer.
Just like that? Yes.
Just like that. He didn't elaborate. He said yes. Now, you don't have to believe him. You don't have to believe him, but let me point out to you that by 2020, your laptop will have more compute power than a human brain. Your laptop already has more memory than a human brain. So it's a question of the software, mostly. And so the point of all this is that any society out there that's even 100, make it 1,000 years more advanced than we are or more, may be beyond biological intelligence. And the thing about machine intelligence is that one machine could dominate it all because it evolves so quickly that it might be a winner-take-all situation. And if that's the case, then you might pick up a signal and it's coming from one individual, if you will, but it's not a biological individual.
Well,